Volume 8C4. Nia awoke feeling the hand on her chest. How dare he? She wanted to roar, until the sudden outrage woke her all the way up, and she felt the hard body of her lover nestled against her, her tail wrapped around his leg and his obvious maleness still nestled where she remembered from the previous night. She smirked a little. For just a moment I thought I was back at some camp in the Holy Kingdom and someone got bold with me. Her eyes shut with sluggish contentment and she pressed herself back against him again. It feels so good to sleep in. She corrected her own thought before she could venture down the path of nudity and do something to awaken Senna. His body's warmth contrasted with the coolness of her skin, and she grabbed the arm draped over her chest and drew it down over her stomach, stealing some more of the blanket as she did so. Nia smirked a little. The large bed easily had room enough for half a dozen people, but they lay together in the center of the thick mattress, surrounded by stuffed pillows that would very definitely need to be washed or cleaned with magic when they finally did rise. Of course, though her eyes were shut, her mind was racing ahead to the duties of the day. Today we have to capture his friends. By the dead gods, I hope I don't have to kill any of them. There was a dull thought. Her promise to try to preserve the lives of the Black Scripture was made in sincerity, but so much depends on them. Even if he plays his part, will they act for him or the mission? Nia had no idea, and if he was being honest, she was more than a little certain that Senna didn't know either. Her heartbeat was slow as a snail's crawl, but it quickened to that of a person running at high speeds when she imagined the worst-case scenario. The Black Scripture, dead, their bodies strewn about in front of us, Senna's face twisted in anguish, and looking at me with those beautiful deep eyes filled with hurt and accusation. I could protest, but if I fail, would even I believe myself? She wondered about that, and her body lost its lazy languidness. Her claws dug a little into his arm. Did you have a nightmare? His hot breath carried the whispered words into her ear. Yes, she whispered. It wasn't much of a lie, but it wasn't quite true either, as it was the waking sort of her own making. Always the warrior. Senna's voice was smooth except for the slight groan as he pushed himself up on his side, casting back the thick black blanket. Relax, I know my friends, my comrades, like nobody else. Remember, he said and patted her thigh, I was right about who they put in charge, and right about what they would do. Plus they're operating on the latest maps that Thousand League Astrologer can give them. They'll go the way I said, and they're no match for what will be waiting for them. I just don't want you to turn on me, Nia said, and when his hand went up to her shoulder, she covered it and looked back at him. I'm a queen, and I have dragon's blood, so naturally I'm very greedy. If I lose you, you'll burn down the slain theocracy? He guessed. It was a joke, but her ice blue eyes showed no sense of humor. No. Maybe. I honestly don't know. I've never loved anyone before. It wasn't that long ago that I wasn't even sure my own parents liked me. If this goes wrong and your friends die. His fingers became a vice on her shoulder and she felt herself falling backward into the soft mattress. Her eyes barely had time to widen, nor shed any tears of fear or anxiety. He was on her then. His mouth at least, covering hers in a kiss. Her lips, which were parted in surprise, remained parted for his welcome, if unexpected touch. He kept the kiss going and tongues dueling for a full minute before he broke it and sat up again. They make their choices. All I'm giving them is a chance. You can't blame yourself, and I can't blame you, if they don't take it. I promise, Senna said and squeezed her shoulder. I promise. He repeated the phrase with slow emphasis. Nia relaxed, and when his hand came away from her shoulder she sat up again. Thank you. The Queen of Frost said, sliding toward the edge of the mattress. Then we should get going, it's just about sunrise now. She glanced toward the window where the light of the false dawn was just beginning to peep over the horizon, and there is still a lot to do. It was nice to sleep in for once. I can't remember the last time I was able to be so lazy. Senna snorted. Sleep in, she says. It's only been about 4 hours. Like I said, we slept in, Nia said and went to a dresser. We should take a quick bath, but we've already overslept and we're probably going to sweat in a little while anyway, so we'll do it when we get back. She leveled a clawed finger at him when the smile spread over his face. Don't even think it, pervert. I mean a real bath. He didn't have the sense of shame required to blush, but he did have the shamelessness required to give her an exaggerated and crestfallen look, like a puppy looking at a treat placed just out of reach. It was impossible for her to feel infuriated with him. But she did remain focused on the matter at hand. We'll get a bath after we return, get you into your captive attire, and go get ready. With any luck, the only Black Scripture member not with us will be Thousand League Astrologer. At least for now," she said, and reaching into her wardrobe, she tossed her own clothes onto the bed, and then reached into the newer dark wooden wardrobe, filled with clothing made for Senna, and tossed him his Black Scripture clothing. The only thing missing was his spear, which sat in the weapons rack beside the bed, just in front of the bow given to her by the Allfather. "These are my regular clothes," he said, then asked, "Do I need the spear?" Senna asked while they began throwing on their clothing. "Of course they are. And as far as they're concerned, you're my prisoner. And as for the spear?" She shot him a long stare and said abruptly, "Not if you're right," Naya answered. When Senna finished securing his boots and yanked the laces tight, he went to the wooden rack, and grabbed his spear before following the Queen of Frost out of the bedroom and into the dim hallway of her castle. Volume 8 C5. King Mare I stood fidgeting on his feet. At his left and right were two young elves who looked down at him with the reverence used to look up at living gods. Their busy hands were fussing over his royal robes, cut from the remnants of the former elf king's clothing. It was flamboyant to say the least, with bright green ruffles and flowing so that it hung loose around his slender arms and legs. Every step sent air rushing up against bare skin. The one difference was, the clothing in which he was dressed included a skirt rather than pants. Though the skirt wasn't quite as short as he liked, it was a small concession to what seemed to be fashionable modesty among the elves since the death of their last monarch. "Aarthth the invaders dead?" he asked without looking at the advisor behind him. The elf out of view was old by elven standards, having the first hints of grey hair on his head. His build was surprisingly good, now that he'd stopped missing meals. It was true for every elf Mare came across. Even though they had lots of food, they were skipping meals out of stress, or they were trying to make themselves unappealing to the former king. "Everyone is looking better now. I hope Lord Ines will praise me," he thought contentedly, while he held no special love of the wood elves, or anyone outside of Nazarick. His passive indifference, juxtaposed against the cruelty and contempt of the late elf king, made him a veritable god-saint in their eyes. "Yes, my king." But the survivors lived to confirm that they were in fact acting entirely on their own, hoping to make a quick profit selling captured elves on the slave markets. They were not affiliated with the cardinals at all. The advisor promised, and it was a promise he could make with confidence. "After seeing them eaten alive from the inside out until they confessed everything, I doubt very much they could have kept any secret, no matter how loyal they were. G. Good. C. Cut their bodies into 6p pieces. A. M. Nail them to wood. P. Put the head on a spike. M. Make them SP spread eagle. Th. Then P. Put all that on the paths the humans would use. M. and K. A. And Ma. Make sure there's a sign. S. So everybody knows what they did." Mare's stutter, contrary to expectation, didn't weaken his words in the slightest. Instead, when he looked back with his luminous eyes, they seemed to be like a monster's looming from above. I can't be burn the sea country. Boo, but they ca can't think that is okay to do." "Of course, my king." The aged advisor bowed deeply at the waist, and the young women attending to the king giggled contentedly. The new king's policy of absolute brutal and lethal retribution toward attempted slavers was a popular one. And did they get anyone?" King Mare asked. "A few isolated individuals close to the border seem to have gone missing," the minister said with a cough, "no more than a dozen." King Mare took that in silence. What is the name of the human cardinal who is not fr friendly, b but will listen?" "There are three. Maximilian, Berenice, and Yvonne. Cardinal Raymond is a reformer, Cardinal Dominic a militant, Ginadine is an unknown. Maximilian, Berenice, and Yvonne are the least friendly that are still reasonable." "Why, my king?" the minister asked. "Am I to draft a letter for you?" No. But IW will be gone for a few hours," Mare said. They never got the chance to ask where he was going. The portal appeared, and he stepped away before the attendants could even finish properly dressing him, and he was gone. Berenice smoothed out her blue dress. It was striped to disguise her plumpness, with white ruffles running vertically from her breasts down to her feet, her short hair done in a bun and her mirthful eyes turned critically toward herself in the mirror. "I still can't believe Dominic invited us to dinner," she thought to herself for the 100th time. The stodgy ball of fire wrapped in flesh was not known for entertaining in any context, and yet, here it was, an invitation. The mystery of his actions kept her mind active and whirling with ideas, most of them less than pleasant, but all of them distracting. So distracting that she had to blame those for why she missed the little elf boy who spoke from behind her before stepping into view of the mirror. "So, you're Berenice, right?" he asked. She all but jumped out of her skin. He was a beautiful child by any standards, blonde hair, tan skin, heterochromatic eyes and a big, toothy smile which matched the chipper voice. She leveled her hand down with palm out, ready to annihilate the child. "Who are you? I don't own any elves. And if you're looking for H," she stopped. He was too well dressed to be an escapee of any kind. One look at the pants and vest, and she could identify that they were rich with magical properties. Plus, he'd asked her name. I am Berenice." "Yes," she confirmed while narrowing her eyes. "Good, my brother wants to see you. He says you're smart and reasonable. So you're coming with me?" the boy commanded with that same gap-toothed grin. Rude to order his elders. She was about to rebuke the child on those grounds before she saw him make a fist, and then the world went dark. She felt herself fall, and her body scraping along the floor. "Don't worry, you're going to live. He just wants you to see something," the elf boy said, before she lost all consciousness. She awoke later. Much later, she thought. It was morning by the look of it. WH where? WH who? She held her head and her eyes popped open as the last memories came back to her. Her wrists weren't bound, and in front of her stood two dark elf children. "Good, you're awake, take it away little brother," the elf boy said to the girl. Thank you Aurora," the girl said, clutching a wooden staff in her hands and shuffling her feet. Berenice became ever more confused, her eyes darted around her. She was standing on an unfamiliar cliff on a long mountain range. Snow seemed to fall constantly, the grey stone covered in white. Down below was a near-endless land that was no more familiar than anything else. "Why you're far from home. I am King Mare the First. Ah, I brought you here to see something. A and B before why you ask." "I'm a boy," he said, and the cardinal looked at the pair with open-mouthed disbelief that stunned her into silence. "Why you're humans they took a dozen elves as SL slaves. We're at Peason and they didn't do it for you. But still." Mare's eyes seemed to grow larger than the mountains as his killing intent crashed down on Cardinal Berenice. "They belong to Lord Dines." The voice was a whispered squeak that sounded more like the roar of 1,000 angry dragons in her head. "Why your country is gonna stop it. And I want them be back. Understand?" Mare shouted while squirming against his wooden staff. Berenice's mind raced and jumped to the only question she was sure of. "Where are we?" "Ah, a long way away. I chose this place because nobody lives here," Mare answered. "So, why does that matter?" Berenice jumped at the next easy question to ask. "So why you can see what I'll do to your country if I don't get back the stolen no ones." Mare straightened, turned on his heel, and leveled his staff at a mountaintop. Before Berenice could ask, a wide circle appeared over the top, followed by another, then another, then another, until 9 circles of vibrant blue circled the mountain peak. Greater area of destruction. World disaster. He cast the spell without a stutter, and a single bright blue beam shot down from one circle to the next. For a moment, there was nothing. That was disappointing. After all that Berenice's thoughts came to a screeching halt when the detonation happened, seemingly from inside the mountain itself. The explosion rocked the world, or so it seemed. Snow was scattered and rocks the size of small castles flew in every direction, smashing into the ground in every direction. Worse, the rocks were so hot that the grey became white and they began to melt, and the hiss when they struck the snow below reached her ears like a cheering crowd. "If I don't have them be back unharmed, with the culprits in on 1 week, will do that to Kakami Miyako. And why you have to stop the humans from doing that again. And if anyone hurt Lord Ines's things, why you have to give us the off-offending hands too," Mare said in a squeaky little voice. He held the staff close to his chest, and the incongruity between his words, actions, and mannerisms was such that Berenice's head began to hurt. The blast of heat and air from the ruined mountain, which was now nothing more than a crater amidst the great ranges, either made it the most convincing illusion she'd ever experienced, or it was real. "I'll see what I can do," Berenice promised as the chill in her heart settled into place that was worse than the cold of the mountain heights. "Gee good. Sister, can you take her back home?" Mare asked. I have things to do. Be back in Crescent Hill Lake." Yeah. Sure thing, little brother," Aura said with a snap of her fingers and a cocky smirk. The gate opened a moment later, and Berenice felt the unbreakable grip of the little elf girl on her wrist yank her bodily along toward the vortex, worry rising in her breast as the cardinal contemplated the existential horror of the circumstance a handful of greedy Slavers put their entire country into. "I will have to be very convincing," she told herself when the elf girl vanished and she was left alone in her room again, the snow already starting to melt and fall off her dress while the memory of the last few minutes seared itself like a brand into her brain, never to be forgotten. Volume 8c6. "So, I'm sorry, I just don't know for sure," Kalka explained to the demoness. Albedo hid her disappointment behind the cup of tea she sipped as Kalka explained what she knew. "They're so secretive, I shouldn't be at all surprised." "That's true. When our nation broke off from theirs, things were tense. The treasures we got were few and none are recorded to have been world items, I'm afraid." Kalka gave a slight shake of her head and glanced out the window. Albedo unconsciously mimicked the gesture, and for good reason. Out in the courtyard the Allfather was tumbling with his 3 children, Albedo's twins and their slightly older half-sibling. His laughter was rich and seemed sourced in some kind of existential happiness that Albedo couldn't quite understand. It came out every time he looked up at the sky as if he couldn't really believe the world existed at all. "He has quite a laugh," the Holy Queen said with quiet appreciation. "It's hard to believe he's real, sometimes. Most kings, most nobles, their children are mere tools. Happiness fleeting and rare, love, a secondary consideration. The family is a mere engine of security. But him? He doesn't see them like that, does he?" No, he does not." Albedo rose and smoothed out her dress. She went to the window and looked down. Ainz knew his wives were on the upper floor, but in moments like this she was sure he wasn't paying any attention to her. His whole heart, his whole mind, everything about him was focused on the moment. Kalka's estimation of noble families rang true. It fit the stories she knew as well, of the kings and queens of Yggdrasil. Evil to their own children. Unthinkable. Do what you will to things with no purpose, but to your own? Even this world's rulers aren't as bad as the ones there. No wonder our Lord chose to remove us from that place. But this place, Kalka is right about that. So many in this world are worth so little more than mere maggots, or less. They're a lucky trio. But if I could ask, Albedo, why are you looking for something like that? Kalka asked and rose to her feet. She stood beside the demoness, the only one in all the world she'd ever met who could be said to be more beautiful than she without question. It rankled less now that Kalka knew that the All-Mother of the growing empire of Nazareth was created by a vanished god, but still, putting herself beside the All-Mother, the Holy Queen couldn't keep at least a tiny pang of jealousy at bay. "Why do you ask why I ask?" Albedo asked with just a glance out of the corner of her eye. Kalka's hand rested on the glass window and her eyes were focused downward. Cocytus, their bodyguard and the children's instructor in the first lessons of the sword, could be heard offering shoulder rides to the toddlers. His halted, muffled voice was so familiar now that Kalka could have read his mandibles even if she hadn't heard a word out loud. "Because he is my husband. Because I care about him in ways I never expected to. Because he is my friend. Because he is the father of the only child I'll ever have. Because he is my king. Because I am loyal to the man who cut the rot from my country and secured us peace with the Queen of Frost. Pick any of those. Pick all of those. They are all enough on their own," Kalka said with the voice of the truest of born royalty, assured in her rightness and undoubting in her straight posture. She didn't flinch from the silence of the demoness. Albedo was sizing her up. Kalka could feel it, the way the side eye went up and down, searching for something, analyzing something that Kalka couldn't see herself. It wasn't the first time the demoness had done that. Most of their interactions seemed to include some small test before a gift or revelation was given out. Kalka resigned herself to the fact that Albedo's protective nature of Ainz would never truly fade much, if at all. So she waited and focused on the scene down below. The voice of Aurelian was loudest. He was the eldest of the trio, and quickest to claim the prize of the shoulder ride. The smaller two waited their turn by climbing on their father's back and playing horsey. What might have been undignified to the point of impossible for any other king must have seemed as right and natural as anything else to their father. Albedo made her choice. Because he was not always that. Albedo answered and inclined her head toward Ainz. He became human thanks to a theocracy spell confined to a mana crystal. I can only conclude that they have a hidden world item. Kalka felt herself be shaken to the core. What was he? She dared to ask. An overlord, a race of ultimate undead, capable of using necromancy that surpassed your Sursana. Albedo answered at once, her decision made. She held nothing back and explained the story as she knew it from Ainz himself. They made him this, and made him vulnerable. You've suggested more than once that he is a god. An astute observation, Kalka. Because you were right. He is a god. A god confined into a mortal body by trickery while choosing to save a few lives on a whim and testing his power in this new world where he brought us to save us from destruction. For years we have experimented, and for years we have failed him. A lump formed in Albedo's throat that she couldn't hide no matter her best efforts. I failed him. Everyone failed him from the very first day we got here. Making him happy has been how I have made up for it. Giving him children, helping him to rule what a god should rule by right. Kalka held her tongue even though she had to bite down on it to keep it from wagging. The pain shot through her mouth, but the bite was effective. We have experimented on many things, but no change is permanent. Most don't even last for hours, a few last for weeks, but they're all impermanent. If we knew just what the theocracy did, that might offer a clue to ending his vulnerability to time, too. Simply choking. There was a half-elf girl whose contributions offered some insight in regeneration, but nothing for transformation. We can keep him young with the apples of Eden, but what if they should perish? What if they're stolen? What if they stop working? 1,000 things can go wrong. Up to and including him just choking on a bite. Albedo held her hands behind her back and squeezed one fist inside the other enough to make the thin black leather gloves she wore groan at the pressure she applied. You want to restore him to being an undead? Kalka asked and tried without success to picture Ainz as a skeleton or zombie-like creature. No. He will not go back to that, I've accepted as much. My king enjoys this too greatly. Albedo tilted her head toward him. Ainz was rounding a circuit with his two younger children spurring him on with their heels. But whatever he might become, we can't fix this as it is. Albedo added, so, do you have any ideas at all? The unspoken or are you useless hung there regardless of whether or not it was said, or even intended. Kalka bristled a little, despite their friendly arrangements and even comradely state that had evolved over the last few years. When Albedo thought of things to be done for their husband's sake, there would only ever be two categories. Useful and useless. Kalka's bristling didn't last, instead she formed her lips into a very small, knowing smile. I do, actually. Albedo's heart skipped a beat. Say it. She breathed the words like a holy prayer. Kalka crossed the tea room to a bookshelf and drew a copy of an old red leather-bound tome from among the tight-packed numbers of others. There are stories of the old gods, beings that traveled over the long river from the Far East. Other than the 6 we know, Kalka said and brought the book to the table where their tea sat waiting. The Holy Queen reclaimed her seat and set the book in the center. She refilled the cups from the little white and gold-trimmed pot and gestured to the opposite chair again. Albedo sat in the slender carved lady's chair designed for the daintier frame, with its slight cushion on the back and on the seat itself, and accepted the cup with only the appearance of interest in its contents while she sipped. She waited, that's all she had to do. When Kalka got going, she really got going. Some of these gods told stories about campaigns of another world that turned beings into gods. One became a god by sacrificing 1,000,000 lives in his name, but was immediately killed by another outraged god. Another became a deity by the mere act of being worshipped by enough people. Supposedly a king of the gold, whatever that means, was widely worshipped and had great power. But he never really became a deity. Or if he did, it didn't stop him from aging as our gods did, Kalka said and wrapped her fingers on the surface of the book. This book is the only one of its kind, the Holy Queen said. Albedo looked down at it. The red leather cover was thicker than it should have been, and seeing the critical yellow vertical slits of Albedo's eyes, Kalka put her fingernail under the leather cover and peeled it away to reveal the words, D&D Player's Handbook and DM Guide Compendium, 5e. Why have I never seen this book? Albedo asked, a mix of wild hope and outrage warred in her heart when she asked. We were promised access to everything. And I gave it, Kalka said and pointed to the bookshelf. It has always been right there. I can only assume that the ones who tore through our library didn't think to see if we kept books anywhere else. Albedo began to calm, but as if she didn't notice how close Kalka came to the demon's outrage, the Holy Queen continued. Whatever happened to our husband, I can't answer. Perhaps the crystal was tied to a world spell? Maybe it didn't work as intended because of who the All-Father is or what he was. But if he ascends to true godhood, if he is acknowledged as a god by the whole of the Empire of Nazarick, maybe that will have the desired effect. At least well enough that he can make whatever efforts you're trying to accomplish more potent. Albedo quietly marked down Kalka on the very short list of humans she had in the ledger of her heart of the humans whose lives she would never take. Then we make it official? We declare him a god and our problems are over? Albedo asked. If only it was so simple, Albedo, Kalka sighed and flipped the book open. The spine cracked with age and the Holy Queen flipped through several pages. A declaration by the player or NPCs under their control shall grant no bonuses. Only a campaign-level event ordered by the Dungeon Master can result in low-level deification, and only if prerequisites are met. What does that mean? Albedo demanded, her fingers closed into a fist in her lap, but to her relief, the mystery vanished. I sat through lessons with this book, every would-be queen or king does. And from what my tutor taught me, it means that the world itself has to acknowledge him, he has to do something that forces the world itself to change, that seems to be what a dungeon master is. Another term for the world itself. Goodness knows why it's so obscure, but... Kalka shrugged, the old six were said to be close. Maybe an empire is a start. Maybe if his worship is encouraged, the world will give him what you're talking about. Kalka suggested, and her stern, squared shoulders slumped a little bit, or rather, relaxed. I don't know. This is only a clue, a possibility. There's no certainty, but he should be praised as a god, even if nothing changed because of it, Kalka exclaimed. He should be. She repeated. Albedo relaxed further as her understanding grew, and though she didn't say anything, instead choosing a quiet sip of tea while Kalka made her declaration, the demoness could not have agreed more. Volume 8 C7. Alain Beaumont took the first step over the border. The others were at his back, he knew that beyond question. His fingers closed with trepidation over his sword. It wasn't his first time over the border with the Abelian Hills, it was far removed from that. But this was different. Despite the protests of Necronadama that the demi-humans couldn't possibly have organized in any significant sense, field operatives like himself and the rest of the Black knew better. Behind him, Cedron held his shields in his hands as tight as Alain held his sword. He could read Alain's thoughts as if the back of Time Turbulence's head were an open book. If that were really true, they wouldn't be raving about the traitor to humanity and all her various mischief. Stepping over the border seemed like nothing. One patch of grass was underneath their feet. They splashed through a creek so small that a human child could have spat across it, and when grass was beneath their feet again they were in another country. But 10 feet of grass and a tree line might as well have been another world. The air felt different, and each of them as they crossed felt the swelling anticipation in their chests as their heartbeats quickened, sweat stung their palms and their every sense went on high alert. Quayes did his part when the last of them crossed. He leaned forward and raced ahead of his comrades, his narrow eyes darted left and right, his short blonde hair whipping wildly in the wind. In moments like this, running alone without his comrades, this was the only time he missed his sister. Clementine, you idiot. Why did you run off that way? This is so much faster with 2 people than with 1. He asked the question as if he didn't know the answer. But whether he did or not was irrelevant. He raced for 50 bowshots to the southwest, then round in a crescent that carried him a further 30 out, and then rounding over a large hill which would let him overlook a demi-human town. Then it would be back to the line after having validated that there was no danger, or removed it, or found a way around it. The Abelian Hills region, however, had one more thing he liked. A thing he liked so much that every now and then, away from the others, he would indulge in. The pale trees of an almost honey-golden shade swayed back and forth in the gentle breeze, the leaves were thick and ran in a rainbow of shades that from above, put the finest painters in the slain theocracy down to mere novices by comparison. But the real gem. Quayes stopped at one. Just a quick breath. he told himself, and closed a hand over a very tiny branch that protruded off of a larger one. The little branch snapped off. He plucked away the leaves and dropped them to the ground, and then shoved the small stick past his thin lips and put it onto his tongue. There was an explosion of flavor in his mouth. Sweet bark trees are the best. He told himself that one little branch would last most of the day, and it wouldn't be obvious to his comrades that he had won. He closely guarded the secret of the sweet trees with their explosive honey-like flavor and the long time that could be spent just suckling them for their sweet inner juices. Though others would never let me live this indulgence down. He had to chuckle about that one, if they only knew. The area around the demi-human villages was mostly empty. The villages themselves, however, one by one, he saw they were rapidly becoming towns, complete with low walls that controlled entry and exit, and worse. Those are stone spitters there. And snake people over there. Megadians over there. Different quarters, but all in the same town? He kept himself downwind and out of sight, and made sure not to look at any one figure directly, keeping his eyes unfocused to take it all in and not let anyone get a sense of being watched. He moved on quickly, his skin crawling as he watched the orderly comings and goings over an unpaved but very clearly well-maintained dirt road with defined borders taking it west toward the Holy Kingdom and north toward the forest. When he finally reached the tall hill, however, he hit his first real snag. A tower? A stone tower, not one of those crap wood things knocked down by a stiff breeze and a bronze-tag adventurer's drunken swing of a mace. He wasn't exaggerating. The tower had a wide base in a circular shape that grew somewhat narrower at the top. 4 snake people guarded the top, each looking in a different direction, each holding large recurved bows. Another new and dangerous thing to see, as they'd never used those before. That tower has to be 50 meters tall, good stone too, and worse. He looked around for a possible source. There was none, at least not close by. The nearest quarry is a long way from here. The stone had to be shipped. Quies forced his sense of discomfort down from his throat and shrank behind the low hill before he could be spotted. Snake people can take presence in from the air, but if what they say is true, then just the taste of a human's presence shouldn't draw their attention, not too much. But we'll have to navigate around that. The answer was obvious. The winding track that ran between hills were little traveled, and he saw no road between the two areas yet. From there we can hit the forest and camp in the peace trees before we move on to the capital. And save our captain's life. Or so Quias told himself. His return was more roundabout, and he found the party of Black Scripture just where they should be, split on opposite sides of a break in the woods, each one so well concealed that their fastest member could barely see any of them. If I can barely tell any are there, then nobody else can see them at all. It was a prideful thought, and it set his other concerns briefly at bay. A short moment's respite before he said, "We're going to take a different route. The risk of being seen is too great otherwise." A slew of idle grunts answered him with acknowledgement and asked no questions of their comrade. They only followed their skillful scout and assassin, slipping silently behind him and racing along the hidden paths they would need to use to get them as close to the capital of Demalbian as they could without risk. "Wait for us, Captain Tacconi. Wait for us," they thought, and raced on silent feet toward whatever the gods had in store for them.